Given that I briefly mentioned parts of my life in the last video, I wanted to elaborate more on a few aspects. For now, I'll focus on my journey of becoming a licensed driver and the struggles that accompanied that milestone. This journey started in high school, and almost immediately I ran into a wall. Figuratively speaking, of course. Soon as I was able to take driver's ed, I was informed that my school could not support me in the goal. They did not have the equipment needed for me to drive. Nobody really had an answer for me, so my recreational therapist and I started researching the topic in our free time. What I found was that there was one place I could get this done. That place was called Adaptive Driving Associates in White River Junction, Vermont. For those wondering, this was an hour away from me. After looking into it, I learned that before I could even begin adaptive driving, I had to be assessed to determine if I had the capability to drive. That assessment alone cost $800, and every session afterwards would cost $120. As if the cost of all of this wasn't stressing me out enough, knowing that I was technically being trained in a different state than I lived in had me nervous as well. I felt that it just further complicated things because I have to be aware of any discrepancies between the two states when it came to taking the test itself. I found out later that I was getting ahead of myself because after the initial assessment, my mom decided that she was not going to bring me back to Adaptive Driving Associates. She felt as the instructor had been talking down to her. For quite some time, this goal had been placed on hold. I'm not entirely sure when I returned to the goal of acquiring my license to further my independence. However, I do remember that a pivotal part of this was when Vocational Rehabilitation of New Hampshire stepped in. They directed me to Northeast Rehabilitation, which is essentially the New Hampshire counterpart for Adaptive Driving Associates. Shockingly, there is one instructor that is certified to teach adaptive driving for all of New Hampshire, which meant that in order to get on her schedule, I would have to schedule months in advance. Just because VOC Rehab stepped into my life and supported me from this point forward does not mean, however, that things ran smoothly after this. At this point, I was a full-time college student who was attempting to fast-track my educational journey so that I could acquire my degree as soon as possible. I often took summer classes, as well as the 4 classes in the fall and spring semesters. Stack that with the fact that Northeast Rehabilitation was an hour and 45 minutes from my college campus, it became clear that I would have to dedicate my summers to driving practice and the other portion of the year to my education. After 3 to 4 years of having to go back and forth between these goals, I finally was able to demonstrate enough competency to get my first car and practice with relatives. The instructor recommended the equipment I would need in order to drive, and I paid for the most basic setup that I would need to be successful. Although VOC Rehab would have supported me in funding the costs associated with adapting a vehicle, this was not an option. In order for VOC Rehab to fund the costs of adapting a vehicle, the vehicle had to meet certain guidelines such as being no older than 2 years and having no more than 60,000 miles on it, and because they only cover the cost to modify a vehicle and not the vehicle itself, I chose to go around them and buy a used car and pay to have hand controls installed. It would have been ideal to get a fully modified vehicle with some sort of lift or ramp, however. Being a college student, I knew that a brand new van was not in the budget, and so instead I had to take a leap of faith and hope that I could figure out how to transport my chair in a sedan rather than having the luxury to drive up and into a $60,000 van. I kept reminding myself that I would figure it out. After all, it was not my first time figuring out the impossible. I decided to enlist some help from a friend who agreed to try getting my chair in the car I had bought. This allowed me to watch the whole process and see things from another angle. Today I disassemble and reassemble my chair every time I drive somewhere, proving once again that hard work and dedication is what truly determines our limits.